Well, as you're seated this morning, I want to invite you to go ahead and take out your Bible. Let's turn together to the book of John, John chapter 8. John chapter 8. If you don't have a Bible, feel free to grab one of the black pew Bibles right in front of you. If you don't have a Bible and would like to take that one home with you, feel free to do that. This morning we are, again, in John chapter 8. This week I was having lunch with one of our church members, a guy that you probably know, Daryl Vickers, and I were having lunch over at McAllister's, and Daryl is one of our deacons. He's helping us out this year with our life groups, helping me to coordinate life groups, and he's just an all-around great guy. You may know he is an architect by trade, but he loves to take pictures. He's a gifted photographer, and he was telling me about a trip that he took not long ago to Fort Griffin, where he had the opportunity of taking some pictures at night. Like, he stayed up to all hours of the night taking some incredible pictures of the sky. And you can tell by his pictures that he can take pictures much better than I. In fact, here's one of the pictures that we were talking about at lunch. This is a picture, again, it's at Fort Griffin, Texas, which is just kind of northeast of Abilene area. And this is a picture, maybe kind of hard to see in this light, but this is a picture at night. You see there's a little farmhouse with the Milky Way galaxy in the distance and just the beauty of the sky right in front of him. Like, I'm amazed just looking at the picture, much less being the guy that would have taken it. The caption that he had on his Instagram says this: "It's hard to fathom how small we are until you've had the chance to stare into the heavens and experience the stars." It's true, isn't it? I mean, there's just something about being out in an environment like that. After lunch, I couldn't get this picture out of my head, and it reminded me of a guy that I've told you about before, a guy by the name of Nicholas Copernicus. You remember old Nicholas? Copernicus was that Polish mathematician and astronomer back from the 1500s who turned his world upside down with his theory of the universe. You see, in the 1500s, the prevailing opinion of the day was that we on Earth were the center of the universe. In fact, it was commonly understood that we earthlings were the anchor of the solar system, that everything revolved around us. But the more Copernicus thought about this, the more that he looked into the sky, the more he studied the position of the stars and the planets, the changing of the seasons, the phases of the moon, the more Copernicus began to question our place in this world. Like, he began to wonder, like, what if our existence is actually tied to something bigger? This led Copernicus to make a controversial declaration. He began to declare that we are not the center of the universe, that the sun is actually the center of it all, which means rather than everything revolving around us, actually everything revolves around the sun. And as you could imagine, this did not go well in the 1500s. In fact, scholars began to scoff at the idea. Governments began arresting people who would proclaim this idea. Even the church said that anybody who believed this was blasphemous. Martin Luther, the great reformer, who obviously didn't have a problem causing waves in the church, called Copernicus a fool for the things that he believed. And perhaps you can understand why, right? Like, who wants to admit that the world doesn't revolve around them? Like, who wants to admit that maybe you're not the center of it all? And as it turns out, you and I know, like, we've studied the world enough to know that Copernicus was right. And what Copernicus did for astronomy, Jesus Christ has done for humanity. You see, here is a revolutionary idea. You and I were not meant to be the center of it all. Instead, there is one to whom our lives was meant to revolve around, and his name is Jesus. And he is the true sun who gives light to all men. And the reason I bring this up this morning is because this morning we are continuing in our sermon series on the 7 I am statements of Jesus in the Gospel of John. And you remember, all throughout the Gospel of John, Jesus takes these moments where he tells us in his own words who he is and what he is like. And listen, the reason we are doing this series is because I am convinced, like with everything that is in me, I am convinced that what you and I need more than anything else is for us just to sit at the feet of Jesus. For you and I to sit at his feet and just honestly hear from him. Allow him to tell us in his own words, like who he is and why his life makes a difference in yours and mine. So last week, we looked at the very first I am statement in the Gospel of John, where Jesus says in John chapter 6, verse 35. You remember in John 6:35, this first I am statement came right after Jesus fed the 5,000. And he told the crowds in John 6:35, he says, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall not hunger, and whoever believes in me shall never thirst. So check this out. Listen, in a world that was desperately looking for something to satisfy the deepest cravings of their soul, in a world that is working so hard, in a world that is searching feverishly, like consuming continuously anything that has the appearance as if it could satisfy our lives. Jesus says, in a world like that, he says, I am the bread of life. Like I am the only one who can truly satisfy what our souls are craving the most. Like that's a pretty bold statement, isn't it? But this morning, Jesus is going to follow up that statement with the second I am statement that comes here in the Gospel of John, chapter 8. John chapter 8, verse 12. Listen to Jesus' second I am statement in the Gospel of John. He says this. Again, Jesus spoke to them saying, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. All right, so John moves from the idea that he is the bread of life to now he says, I am the light of the world. Like one powerful verse. This is a verse I would guess in a room like this. This is a verse that we've probably heard before. It's probably a verse that we are familiar with, and yet it is packed with so much purpose and depth and meaning. So, this morning, if you are taking notes, I want us to notice that the I am statement can easily be divided into two very simple parts. So, two parts if you're taking notes. Part one is a bold claim. And then part two, we'll see a compelling call, right? So that's kind of the direction that we're going from. John chapter 8, verse 12, we've got a bold claim, and then number two, a compelling call. So notice first the bold claim. If we're going to understand why Jesus makes this statement, that I am the light of the world, if we're going to understand why he makes this statement, then we need to start by looking at the context by which Jesus tells these words. So, if you've got your Bibles, turn back just one chapter, John chapter 7, verse 2, and you'll notice the setting by which Jesus makes this statement. So in John chapter 7, verse 2, John tells us that all of this happens during the Feast of Booths. John says, now the Jews' Feast of the Booths was at hand. Now you may be asking, well, what exactly is the Feast of the Booths? Well, Feast of Booths, or the Feast of the Tabernacles, some would call it the ingathering because it comes at the end of the harvest season. In Hebrew, it's known as Sukkot. And Sukkot is one of the three major Jewish festivals that all Jewish males 18 years of age and older would have had to travel to Jerusalem to celebrate. And it actually takes place in this time of the year, like September, October time of the year. And according to the ancient historian Josephus, Sukkot was actually like one of the most popular feasts of the year. It officially was a 7-day festival, actually spilled into an 8th day, but it was filled with all kinds of celebrations, all kinds of reasons to be filled with happiness and joy. And the purpose of the feast was actually twofold. One, it was to celebrate the provision of the harvest that they had just completed. But then two, the Feast of Booths was to remember God's provision for his people in the wilderness wanderings of Exodus. And so, because of that, people would travel from all over, and they would come to celebrate this feast in Jerusalem. And there were three kind of primary ways that they would celebrate the feast. First, they would build these kind of temporary structures, these almost like homemade tents. They were made of branches and leaves, and for an entire week, like, I don't know, anybody go camping growing up as a kid? Like, our family used to love to go camping. Some of the best memories of my life were us camping near a stream in some backwoods of Tennessee or North Carolina. But here, for an entire week, they would travel to Jerusalem. And they would set up along the roadsides these camping structures to commemorate the journey out of Egypt and towards the promised land. I think about this, and I think about not just my camping trips growing up, but for whatever reason, I'm weird, I don't know. I think of, on Black Friday when people are camping out at Best Buy, and they've just got like these tents that are all of the Best Buy, waiting to get in line so they can buy the next PlayStation, whatever it is, right? Or what about Chick-fil-A? I don't think they do this anymore, but there was a time at Chick-fil-A that anytime Chick-fil-A opened a brand new restaurant, you could camp out. And if you were one of the first 100 to get in Chick-fil-A, you got Chick-fil-A for a year. Like the Lord's chicken for a whole year. But you had to camp out for who knows how long to be able to get it. So this is the picture. Again, I'm weird. I'm sorry. I don't know why that comes to my head. But the purpose of the tent here, the reason that they would go to Jerusalem and set up these temporary structures was to remember God's provision for them as they journeyed from Egypt to the Promised Land and how they lived in these temporary tents along the way. But then the second way that they would celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles or Booths is that there was this special water ritual. So every day, the priest would go down to the pool of Siloam, and he would get water out of the pool of Siloam, and he would take the water back to the temple. And all of this was with great fanfare and great celebration. And when the priest would get back to the temple, he would take the water that he had gotten from the pool of Siloam, and he would pour it out on the ground. Now, you may be like, well, that's like the biggest waste of time ever, right? But the reason that they would do this is this was a reminder of how God provided water for them in the wilderness. And once again, it was a huge celebration that they would do every day. And then the third way that they would celebrate, which is in particular helpful for us as we come to John chapter 8, is the third thing that they would do is they would have this huge lamp lighting ceremony. And the huge lamp lighting ceremony would actually take place in the outer courts of the temple. And every night they would come together, like all of the people would come together, and they would light these 4 huge candelabras. And they would light them in the courts of the temple. And as they would ignite it, it would cause the light to just shine brightly on the Temple Mount. But it didn't just light up the temple, it lit up the entire city all around it. It was like an all-night party. Because as they lit the fires, they would sing and they would dance and they would have torches in their hand and they would be just joyfully praising the Lord, like all night long until the sun comes up the next morning. Again, for whatever reason, I'm weird, I know. For whatever reason, when I think of this picture, I think of those huge homecoming bonfires. Anybody ever been to an Aggie bonfire by any chance? I mean, it's pretty amazing. I don't think the Aggies were praising the Lord and jumping. I don't think that's what they were doing. But here, this is what they're doing. Like think of a huge bonfire. Think of 4 cauldrons of fire that are just lighting up the sky. And the reason why they are doing this is to remember the way that God guided them in the desert. And how did God guide them in the desert? Through a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. In other words, the Lord was the light that led the way for them. Now, are you starting to see why Jesus' words are such a bold claim? Because when Jesus comes on the scene in John chapter 8, they have just celebrated, they've just spent several days, like an entire week, where every single night they're gathering together, worshiping the Lord, praising the Lord, remembering His presence with them in the past, and longing for His presence to lead them in the future. And Jesus comes on the scene. And John chapter 7, verse 37 tells us that He comes on the scene at the last day of the feast. So the backdrop is with these great cauldrons that had been lit, that are now no longer burning. In the aftermath of all of this, Jesus stands up and says, I am the light of the world. And notice, He doesn't say, I am a light, as if Jesus were just one of many lights. No, He's saying, I am the light. And He's not just the light of the Jews. He's the light, and He's not just the light of Judea or of Jerusalem or of Galilee. No, He says, I am the light of what? The world. Like, the implications of this are absolutely huge. And what do we know about what light does? Well, light does a ton of different things, but in particular, as we think about it in the context of this story, let me just mention a few of the things that we know that light does. For example, light leads us home, right? Like, isn't this what God did for His people in the Exodus story? Like, in the midst of some of their darkest days, in the midst of not knowing where to go or what to do, the Lord was their light. The Lord was the pillar that led them to the promised land. Like, they knew the way because they followed the light. Like, light leads us home, but light also is a guide, right? Psalm 119, verse 105. Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. The psalmist says in Psalm 43, verse 3, send out your light and your truth. Let them lead me. Let them bring me to your holy hill and to your dwelling. Friends, there is a reason that cars have lights on them. There is a reason that lighthouses are put on rocky shores. Because one of the challenges of living in a dark world is sometimes it can be hard to know which way to go, right? Like, sometimes it can be hard to know which way is home. And when Jesus says, I am the light of the world, part of what He's reminding us of is that He is the only true presence that can guide us in the darkness. Like he is the only true source that can lead us away from danger and into the safe harbors of his love. But then, what else do we know about light? Well, light is what leads us home. Light is what guides us, but light is also what illuminates the darkness. Do you remember how the creation story begins? Like in Genesis 1. Before anything was made, Genesis chapter 1, verse 2 says that the earth was without form and void. Darkness was over the face of the deep. And what was God's first act in the creation story? Well, he spoke, and what did he say? He said, "Let there be" what? Light. And there was light. And when Jesus started creation, he took what was formless and he gave it form. He called light, and light became the foundation of life. Like when the prophet Isaiah is talking about the coming Messiah in Isaiah chapter 9. We often hear this at Christmas time, but the prophet Isaiah says in Isaiah chapter 9 that the people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in the land of deep darkness, on them light has shone. But listen, when Jesus does come on the scene, in John chapter 3, Jesus tells us that there is, follow me here, there is a natural tendency in the heart of man for us to hide from the light. John chapter 3, verse 19. Do you remember in this conversation that Jesus has with Nicodemus, who comes to him at night? After that, in John chapter 3, verse 19, Jesus says these words. He says, "And this is the judgment. The light has come into the world, and people loved the darkness rather than the light because their works were evil. For everyone who does wicked hates the light and does not come into the light, lest his works be exposed. But whoever does what is true comes to the light so that it may be clearly seen that his works have been carried out by God." What's Jesus saying here? Well, one of the effects of light is that light reveals what is hidden, right? Light exposes what we would rather keep secret. And this can be uncomfortable, right? Like, have you ever walked into a well-lit bathroom and bent down to wash your hands and looked in the mirror? Like, it can be a little scary at times. Because well-lit rooms have a way of showing you sometimes more than you expect. Like, did I really leave the house looking like that? Where did that wrinkle come from? How did hair grow from that place? Right? Like, light reveals the truth of who we are. And sometimes it can be hard. That's why when you're working in your flower bed and you pick up a board or a piece of trash that's been there for a few weeks, and the bugs underneath just kind of go running for cover, like they're not standing up applauding you saying, "Thank you for giving me light. That's awesome." No, what are they doing? They're running for cover because they like to do their destructive work in the dark. I think that's also why horror films don't happen in the daytime. Because sin loves darkness, right? And by nature, we are sinners in need of grace who often are hiders of our sinfulness. And yet, if Jesus is the light of the world, then part of what he's communicating to us is that Jesus clearly sees. He clearly sees us just the way that we are. Like nothing is hidden from his light. But listen, the purpose of light isn't merely to condemn us. Like if you go into the bathroom and you look at yourself in the mirror and you're like, "Oh, Like you've got a big black splotch on your cheek. You don't just walk out of the bathroom with a big black splotch on your cheek, right? No, you get in that water and you scrub it off. Like the purpose of light isn't simply to condemn us. The purpose of light is to help reveal what needs to change. It is to heal us. Like the story right before this in John chapter 8 is an incredible story. It's a story of a woman who's caught in the very act of adultery. And man, you talk about an awkward moment. And yet the religious leaders bring this woman to Jesus. And they say to Jesus in John chapter 8, verse 4, they say, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the very act of adultery. Now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such a woman, but what do you say?" So here's a woman who's caught in the midst of sinfulness in the dark. And she is brought to the light of the world. And the light of the world is asked, what should we do with this woman? Like, this is a pretty sticky question, isn't it? But Jesus sees the fullness of the woman's condition. And in the midst of seeing every part of her, he cares for everything that is about her, her physical needs, her spiritual needs, and her emotional needs. And by God's grace, Jesus diffuses the situation. He tells the religious leaders, listen, anybody who is without sin, let him cast the first stone. And guess what happens? Like you can almost hear the stones falling to the ground. And after the religious leaders leave, Jesus turns to the woman and he says, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No one." And Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on, sin no more." You see, when we bring our sin to Jesus, like when we honestly confess to Jesus, like who we are, like the mistakes that we've made, the shortcomings, like when we bring this to the light of the world, listen, he is willing to cover them by his grace. And yet the irony of the gospel is, like if we attempt to cover them ourselves, like if we try to hide them, if we try to justify them on our own, then the Bible tells us that one day Jesus will expose them and judge them. John tells us in 1 John chapter 1, he says, if we walk in the light as he is in the light, the blood of Jesus, his son, cleanses us from all sin. 1 John 1:9, if we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. You see, what makes Jesus' claim so bold is not merely that he claimed to be God, though they did not like that at all. But what makes Jesus' claim so bold is, yes, he claims to be God, but also he claims to be the only one who can lead you home. Jesus claims to be the only one who can truly guide you in the midst of dark. Jesus claims to be the only one who not only can see everything about us, but can reveal the longings of our heart and then bring us the true life that we desire. Brothers and sisters, without light, life physically and spiritually will not thrive. But the bold claim of Jesus this morning that comes roaring across the text is this: Jesus is the light of the world. Which leads us to the second thing. So there's the bold claim at the beginning of this verse, and then the second part of it is there's a compelling call. So the second part of this I am statement, Jesus is extending an invitation. Because not only does he say, I am the light of the world, he says right after that, keep reading, he says, whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but we'll have the light of life. Like in the midst of the crazy world that we live in the midst of the beginning of new semesters where everything seems new, where we don't know where to turn, to our right or to our left. We don't know who is a friend and who is just trying to use me to do something else, to achieve something else. Like we navigate this world in the midst of darkness, and the world is swirling with so much uncertainty. A world where it can be hard to navigate the personal challenges, the health challenges, the cultural challenges, like the global uncertainties all around us. And Jesus says, listen, there is a light that can illuminate the darkness. There is a way that leads to life. And Jesus says, whoever follows me. Like it comes from following the light of the world. And you notice Jesus doesn't say, whoever thinks about me occasionally. Jesus doesn't say, like, whoever goes to church when they get a chance. Jesus doesn't say, whoever acknowledges my existence or remembers a story about me from Sunday school. No, Jesus says, whoever follows me. Like whoever actually gets in the boat with me. Like whoever actually decides, you know what, I'm tired of walking in the dark. Like whoever decides, I'm tired of fumbling around in this world looking for answers. Like whoever comes to him and says, I'm tired of investing my paycheck after paycheck pursuing things that ultimately do not matter. Jesus says, whoever would come to me, whoever would enter into a relationship with me, whoever would be willing to do what I do, go where I go, live like I live, receive the grace that I offer. Jesus says, to all who follow me, listen, they will never, ever walk in darkness. Like, does that not blow you away? Like there will never be a time when the presence of God is not with them. There will never be a time when circumstances or situations where the light of life will not be present. Like you will not live in the emptiness of darkness, but you will have the light of life. And there are many of you in this room who have walked through some dark and difficult days. And so you know that when Jesus says they will not walk in darkness, that doesn't mean that things won't be tough. But what that does mean is that the light of life will be with you every single step of the way. Like you will not walk in the absence of God in anything that you pursue. And you would think, like if you're in the temple courts and if Jesus is beginning to proclaim this, you would think in the midst of the crowd like that, you would think that at this point the people in the crowd would begin singing and praising and dancing because the presence of God that hadn't been seen in a long time, the presence of God now comes and says, I am the light of the world. And you think maybe some torches might need to be lit, or maybe somebody needs to start dancing and singing. But when you look at the story, like that's not what happens. In fact, when you look at the story all around this I am statement, both before and after the statement, there's a growing hostility towards Jesus. And that growing hostility towards Jesus comes to a point in John chapter 9 that there's this incredible story that I think really just brings all of this home. In John chapter 9, there's a story of a blind man who meets Jesus right about this same time. The blind man had spent his entire life living in darkness. Jesus sees him and does a really strange thing. You remember the story? Jesus gets down and he spits in the ground, makes some mud, and puts it on the blind man's eyes. Now, if I'm the blind man at this point, I may not be able to see Jesus, but I know what hawking a loogie sounds like, right? And after Jesus puts mud on the blind man's eyes, he tells the blind man to go to the pool of Siloam. You remember the pool of Siloam? And to wash in the pool of Siloam. And in John chapter 9, the story is really pretty clear. Verse 7, the Bible tells us that the man went, he washed, and he came back seeing. Here's a man who had spent his whole life walking in darkness. But he finds Jesus and he follows his command. And as a result of following him, this blind man who had seen nothing but darkness now sees nothing but light. But there's a contrast in the story in John chapter 9 because the religious leaders, the Pharisees, they see the blind man who had been healed. And they're like, are you the guy? You can't be the guy. And the blind man's like, no, I am the guy. Like, no, you're not the guy. So they argue with him. And in the process of doing this, we discover that Jesus had healed the man on the Sabbath, which is part of the reason the Pharisees are so upset. And so rather than the Pharisees praising God that a blind man receives his sight, they shame the man and reject Jesus. When you get to the end of the story in John chapter 9, you begin to realize what the whole point of John chapter 9 is. Because these Pharisees who claimed to be able to see Jesus, who claimed to know Jesus so well, who claimed to follow the law better than anybody else. These religious leaders who claimed to see, we discover, are actually the ones who are blind. They're actually the ones who are in the dark. And we begin to realize that there are two ways that you can respond to light. You can be like the little bugs in the flower bed, who when light comes, they run back into darkness. Or you can be like the blind man who follows Jesus and obeys his commands, even though sometimes they don't make sense. And you can see, and your life be transformed forever. You see, the reality is, our world is filled with so many different lights. So many different people that would say, hey, if you'll just follow this idea or follow this person, or if you'll just go with this group of people, you'll find the success, the things that your life and your heart long for. And you've been around enough to know. Maybe old Nicholas Copernicus was onto something. Maybe the world was never meant to revolve around us. Maybe there actually is a light that is worth following. A light that will lead you home. Because I don't know about you, but I've tasted in so many different ways what the world has to offer. And friends, what it has left me with is with a longing for something different, something to satisfy. And yet when I was a senior in high school, at the verge of literally almost taking my own life because of the dissatisfaction I'd found in this world. Like, I'd come to a place where I just wanted the pain on the inside to be somehow felt on the outside. And I was willing to do anything to make that happen. And I got in my Ford Mustang, and my mom had driven my car earlier in the day, and when I turned on my Mustang, the Christian radio station was playing. And I realized, through the words of a song by Petra, of all people. Some of you have no idea who Petra is. But I realized that Jesus is the only way that actually leads me home. And as I sat in my car, I just surrendered all that I was to him. And can I just tell you today, the light of the world has transformed this life. And I'm convinced he'll do the same thing for you.